Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the final Euro video that we have for the 2024 championships. We have two teams left. We're in the finals. We, as in Spain, but obviously England as well, which I'm sure a lot of people are excited for. This is probably the two teams that I would say were favored to get towards the finals, and Spain have probably impressed during the tournament and sort of overcome two top teams. England were able to overcome Switzerland, who I think after reconsidering probably all the performance in the tournament, we're actually a very, very good team. At the same time, they probably played their best piece of football, I'd say, within that 45 minutes in the first half versus the Netherlands, whereas, of course, Spain have had some tough matches, but they've also put themselves into leading positions quite comfortably within the tournament. So that is, an interesting piece of insight. What I have here are the sort of Opta final almost predictions for the odds between Spain and England. They've actually moved a little bit back into England's favor. I did think that it was a bit disproportional. 60% was previously what it was to England's 40%. Bookies odds, as we can see as well by Rob T's graphics, are also pretty consistent with that, right? A few days ago, I think it was 59% leaning towards Spain, obviously suggesting that Spain will do a little bit better. So whatever you're sort of inferring from this game, it will be quite close. Could be one of those both teams to scores type games that we've already seen within the semifinals so far, but Spain a little bit more favored previously than they were versus, let's say, Germany or even France, which were the two teams that they faced off in the past. So a bit of context, I think you have to sort of make your decision right now, right? If you're chasing mini leagues, it seems like most people will probably go for a slightly heavier Spain stack, generally speaking. At the same time, if you're, let's say, confident in some English picks, if you want to sort of chase, it does make sense to maybe go against the odds and to just go for an English victory here as well. Ultimately, this is the chance to take your risks. And the most important sort of risk-taking element, I suppose, within this game week is also captaincy. It seems like players like Lamine Yamal and Dani Olmo will be the preferred captaincy options. Going outside of that will also get you a huge modicum of points if you're able to go against that, and it's going to work. But of course, odds are odds, and we'll have a look at, obviously, my team selection as well. What I'd like to also feature at this moment in time too is a nice little graphic from La Pausa, a sort of Spanish podcast, and they've featured effectively a graphic of how good teams have been within this competition, rather, in when let's say no team is protecting a lead or needing to equalize. So it kind of shows you in a stable game situation, for example, when the game is 0-0, how dominant Spain have been in those situations. Now, Spain clearly have struggled when they're actually in a leading position, right? For example, when they were defending versus France, probably in the second half versus Barcola, or when they were defending in the second half versus Germany, for example, when they had a lead as well. So that is interesting context, in my opinion. It doesn't really illustrate too much, to be honest. I think it just shows you, a little bit of the tail of the tape of how strong Spain have been, at least, visually, without even having to score goals per se. And that's another sort of key metric. Now, England, obviously, I think have probably actually stepped up over the tournament. You can say that Southgate's substitutions have been really good, and undeniably they've worked out. So as a Spaniard, I'm definitely a little bit worried, and hopefully, obviously, it'll be a great finals. But let's just jump into my team selection. Before we jump into my team selection, I'd like to shout out all the viewers who've been watching the Euro content so far. Thank you so much for the support. Really, really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the game mode. It's a little bit of a fun time off to enjoy the football as well, but of course, still engaged in fantasy elements and that sort of thing. FPL content will be back soon as well. So if you're an FPL fan, a Premier League fan even, do feel free to check out the FPL content that will be rolling out immediately after this tournament culminates, and looking forward to get started to that as the prices have started to come out, and I'll probably be reacting to some of the prices informally as well, maybe on a live stream. Now, obviously for this finals, I will be backing Spain. I think it is the more logical decision, but as I said, if you are someone who's considering, chasing your leagues, you have a position you want to get to, you're down several points, the captaincy swing could be enough to, for example, swing how the final goes, especially if you're going to know how your friends and even foes, for example, will line up. At the same time, of course, you can go against the grain and maybe hedge towards a certain result, right? For example, maybe even something like a 0-0, which tends to happen, right? Finals are quite low-scoring games. We've seen that traditionally. Not too often do you see a dominant final win. I think the last time we saw one was probably, honestly, Spain versus Italy a couple Euros ago, and that's quite normal. So I think when you look at some of the defenses, what have we talked about so far in this tournament? Ball recoveries are nice. Having said, of course, in the previous semi-final games with four rather very contested teams, the ball recoveries weren't particularly high, so it wasn't really as crazy exceptional as in the group stage. But we saw, for example, even in Spain versus Germany, it can happen, right? Rodri can get 14 ball recoveries, and even, for example, in the France versus Portugal match, we saw a lot of ball recoveries there. So things can change, but I think we know that there's some consistency with a lot of these players who've just in general racked up good ball recoveries throughout the tournament. Now, I'm going to jump into my team selection here, starting with the defense. My defense is going to be Spanish based. One thing I will mention in terms of the defense is that I still prioritize 100% the ball recoveries, because I think it's easier for defenders to get ball recovery points than it is for keepers to make 3 saves. Look at the game so far in the semifinals. It was very, very rare to see any of the goalkeepers actually make, really more than 3 saves, because it feels like, of course, the amount of shots are much lower. The quality of shots arguably is a little bit higher as well, because they're, specific scenarios where teams are honestly looking for really good opportunities to shoot, as opposed to having the dominance to sort of shoot from afar or having to rely on, shots out from distance. And so I do like prioritizing, even if I think, for example, Spain will get better clean sheet odds, that I would prioritize someone who gets ball recoveries first within the English team than, let's say, going for someone else. So I think Guehi for me is an absolute lock within the team, even though I'd like to back, of course, a Spanish clean sheet. For that reason as well, I'll be going for Unai Simon, because I think, of course, when it comes to clean sheet odds, you might as well just go with the goalkeeper at this point, because it's not like too much will change. I'm also going with Laporte because he's actually been better than Cucurella over the course of the tournament on an average sort of per 90 minutes basis than Cucurella. So for that reason, Laporte stays in the team. And the new addition to the squad, of course, is going to be Dani Carvajal. For me, when I look at the Spanish team, he's the most productive player for sure when it comes to the defense. Already scored a goal in this tournament, but generally speaking, of course, when you compare, let's say, the game between Cucurella and Carvajal, Carvajal is definitely someone who, will find more opportunities to, let's say, make set pieces count, right? We've seen him score. He will be in the box for set pieces. He is someone who, continues to stay there for actions. For example, the goal he scored versus Croatia is a good example of that. At the same time, of course, in open play, I think we know that Carvajal is a little bit more creative as a player compared to, let's say, Cucurella. And I think that makes a huge difference, right? Now, when it comes to some of the other defenders, I do quite like Luke Shaw, of course, if he starts, but that's a pretty big if as well. We might see a little bit of a mirror situation to what happened in the Netherlands game. So if you kind of like Luke Shaw's differential, I totally appreciate that. What I will say is that all the other players in the tournament, in my opinion, are not that interesting, outside of maybe if you really want to go for Lenormand and you're a little bit confident about the fact that he can get a lot of ball recoveries. The only thing I'll mention is that I didn't really like the substitution for Lenormand at 45 minutes versus Germany, right? Yes, of course, he got a yellow card, but how often does a coach really take a defender off even after they get a yellow card? For me, that showed that, first of all, we had probably quite a lot of faith in Nacho as well to deputize, and for that reason as well, I'm not that high on Lenormand, because who says that we can't do that potentially once again, because Nacho has deputized well when he's been a center back, and we obviously have that option at any point in the game. And Spain is also another country that I would say we tend to probably make more midfield substitutions than defender substitutions. Teams will usually move into a back 5 or even arguably a back 6 to, let's say, defend a lead. Spain are quite different in the sense that their traditional substitutions will probably be more like, for example, getting Mikel Merino into the midfield, having a little bit more of an aerial presence in the center, having a little bit more dominance in the center of the park, as opposed to, for example, just, trying to defend completely. Now, of course, teams have done well, but when Spain has a lead, but generally speaking, of course, I still back Spain for, the defensive aspect of this final. As far as the midfield, moving on to that, we are going to be going with the sort of full Spanish quartet here, and then actually I will be fielding a 3-5-2 as well. Now, the decision, I think, if you are going to stack with Spain is really who gets dropped out, right? You have Dani Olmo, you have Rodri, you have Williams, and you have Fabian Ruiz in the midfield. In the attacking positions, you've got Yamal and Morata. So even if you were to Spain stack, I think the question, of course, is always going to be, who are you going to stack with? And someone is going to lose out. In my situation here, I think Morata is going to lose out for me. I'd rather go for the midfielders. I think the minutes between, let's say, Williams and Morata are going to be quite similar. And I still think that the chances, for example, that Williams could get man of the match, even though he is, paired up with a very tough opponent in Walker, is still sort of worth pursuing. At the same time, as a midfielder, we always know that there's more avenues towards points. Morata is a little bit different compared to, let's say, Harry Kane, where I don't even really believe that he's the penalty taker for Spain. I've always thought that it was Rodri. And all you have to look at is, for example, that example with the Brazil friendly, the 3-3, where Rodri took 2 penalties. Now, Morata has also missed penalties professionally for Spain. And for that reason, as I said, I don't think there's too much to really scoff at the idea of Rodri being on penalties. I think it's going to happen if it does. And because, as I said, the minutes are similar between Williams and Morata, and I don't think the odds are really too far apart, I'd like to go with Williams in this situation. On the flip side, though, I think Morata is probably going to be a little bit of a lower owned pick when it comes to the final. So if you're willing to drop one of the Spanish midfielders for Morata, there is that sort of risk and that upside there of going for Morata that you can definitely consider at this moment in time. I think that Dani Olmo probably has been our most prolific player, and when you look at the tournament so far, it's hard to actually say that he's not the player of the tournament, because I think he's just been major in almost all the key games, particularly the knockout games as well. So it's between really him, Yamal, and Fabian Ruiz for me as the top Spanish players. And obviously we can't give Rodri enough credit, because unfortunately I've just named 3 players ahead of him, and he probably is still arguably our best player. But that's life as well. That's sort of fantasy football too. Rodri, as I said, I still think is on penalties. He will still be able to get ball recoveries. Him and Fabian Ruiz are very good in the sense that I expect them to play, extra minutes. If it ever comes to extra time, for example, these are players that you can rely upon more. I expect Williams, Olmo potentially to be earlier substitutions. We don't necessarily have great deputies for Nico Williams or even Dani Olmo, right? It's Alex Baena. It's probably Ayoze Perez. We haven't really even used or utilized Ayoze Perez before, because unfortunately he was injured before the Albania game, where I think he could have very well started. And ultimately it seems like we're going to be doing more traditional substitutions and defensive substitutions like Merino, like we've seen, and something like Morata for Oyarzabal. So these are the options. I like those 4 Spanish midfielders because I think I prioritize them over Morata. As far as who I'd captain, probably out of all the midfielders, I think it would still be Dani Olmo for sure. Now, because obviously we have to go for 3 English players, and I think it's still very sensible to do so, I'd like to go for Foden because, okay, I think, yes, of course, I'm very much invested into the Spanish clean sheets, but at the same time, you can argue in a both teams to score situation, just like, for example, Netherlands versus England, or even the Spain versus France game, ultimately, you still want to pick the players who are most likely to do well. And I'm not saying necessarily that Foden's going to do much better than Bellingham and Saka, but I just like the idea that at this stage in the tournament, he's not produced anything so far. And I think Foden was brilliant in the Netherlands match. And ultimately, I do think there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of his ability to get onto the ball since that sort of small tactical shift, which is, Saka a little bit more out wide, Trippier effectively playing as part of that sort of 5-back formation, and then England sort of really being situated with a back 3. With that sort of, being in mind, I do really like the idea of just going for Foden, because even though he might have more reduced minutes compared to Bellingham and Saka, he is someone who can obviously be a great differential at this stage in the tournament. I don't even really mind the idea of captaining Foden, for example, if you were desperate to chase, just for that sort of reason. And at the same time, his bookies odds are still very, very good. In fact, slightly better than players like Bellingham and Saka, but keep in mind, of course, minutes are very important when you're making these sort of considerations. As far as the forward positions, I'm going to be going with Yamal and Kane. I think Yamal, as I said in the previous video, is leading this tournament so far when it comes to expected goals and expected assists for Spain. That hasn't changed after the Spain vs France game, and I still think he's our most key player when it comes to the attacking side of things. Now, of course, whilst Fabian Ruiz probably is maybe our best player right now in terms of connecting all aspects of play together, because he's really done it all, I still think that Yamal is probably still the key player for us when it comes to attack, and that's why I prefer him as a captaincy option for this match day as well. Mostly because I'm backing a Spanish result. Kane, undeniably, of course, I was pretty frustrated last time out that he got the penalty. Fair enough. He took it and he scored, and that's also why you own players like Kane or any penalty taker at any time in a fantasy game. So you can't really get too upset about it. That's life. Took a risk against it and it didn't pay out. But Kane will be with my team in the final. Now, of course, there might be some miracle situation where, let's say, Ollie Watkins shows up and he starts, which I find to be very, very, very unlikely. And so, that will probably just be a like-for-like change if it really does happen. I do not believe it will. And that's it. That's going to be my team selection. We only need 11 players for the finals, keep in mind. So the bench does not matter. You can spend as many free transfers as you want out of the 6. All you need to do is get 11 players onto the field. And unfortunately, I won't have to take any hits to do so. And at the same time, I think this is my favorite team. If I was wildcarding or on a limitless, I'd probably be on the same team. So I don't really mind, the position that we've left in within this tournament. Thank you guys once again so much for watching the videos and the content so far. I hope you've liked it. I hope you've enjoyed the games. Take care and goodbye. And I'll see you guys soon for some more FPL content.